July 5, 2014. Malé International Airport, Maldives. A Russian hacker scrolls his phone in the departure lounge, 90 minutes from touching down in Moscow and permanent freedom. His laptop holds 1.7 million stolen credit card numbers. His father sits in the Russian parliament. For 9 years, the FSB has shielded him from every arrest warrant, every extradition request. He doesn't notice the two sunburned Americans in cargo shorts watching him from across the terminal. They carry no badges, weapons, or legal authority. They've tracked him for 6 days, and this is their final chance. In 60 seconds, they'll either spark an international crisis or watch the most wanted hacker on Earth vanish forever. The problem? No extradition treaty exists between the Maldives and the United States. No court can touch him here. So the Secret Service made a decision. If they can't arrest him legally, they'll kidnap him. How do you steal a man from foreign soil? And what happens when a superpower breaks its own rules? Roman Seleznev built a criminal empire before his 25th birthday. Operating under the alias Track 2, he pioneered a method for breaching point-of-sale systems at restaurants, hotels, and retail chains across America. The technique was elegant in its brutality. Infiltrate a payment processor, install malware that copied card data during legitimate transactions, then harvest the numbers by the thousands while customers swiped their Visas and MasterCards without suspicion. By 2014, Roman had stolen 2.9 million credit card numbers and caused $170 million in verified damages across hundreds of American businesses. His marketplace websites, Track2.name and 2pack.cc, operated as eBay for stolen financial data, selling card dumps to fraudsters on 6 continents who converted those digits into cash, merchandise, and untraceable gift cards. Roman spent his profits on Lamborghinis, chartered yachts, and resort suites that cost more per night than most Americans earn in a month. But his greatest asset was not money. His father, Valery Seleznev, held a seat in the Russian State Duma, the lower house of parliament. In Moscow, that bloodline functioned as body armor. Roman bragged in underground forums that FSB agents monitored his safety. The intelligence officers who should have arrested him instead protected him, a courtesy extended to the children of powerful politicians whose cooperation the Kremlin valued. On Russian soil, Roman operated with total impunity. Every extradition request the United States filed landed in Moscow's trash, returned with bureaucratic explanations that fooled no one. For a decade, American cybercrime investigators could only watch as Roman sold stolen cards in plain sight, taunting law enforcement from behind a screen and a border they could not cross. He operated openly because he understood the fundamental truth of international law. Jurisdiction ends at the frontier. Then Roman got careless. After years of meticulously avoiding any nation with a U.S. extradition treaty, he grew restless. The same arrogance that made him flaunt his crimes made him believe he had mastered every variable. He wanted a vacation worthy of his wealth, somewhere exotic enough to match his self-image as royalty of the digital underworld. He researched countries where American warrants held no power and selected the Maldives, turquoise water, 5-star resorts, and zero extradition agreement with Washington. Roman booked a private water villa at a luxury resort for $50,000, complete with a personal butler and a deck extending over the Indian Ocean. He saw paradise. He saw immunity. He saw the perfect loophole. What he did not see was the flag his airline reservation triggered in a Secret Service database 8,000 miles away. A routine scan of travel records hit a tripwire. An analyst in Washington stared at his monitor and felt his pulse spike. Roman Seleznev, the ghost they had chased for a decade, had just purchased 2 tickets to Malé. One agent on the distribution list had to search a map to locate the Maldives. Within hours, a conference call connected a dozen federal officials across 3 agencies. The consensus was immediate. This was the opportunity of a lifetime, and it was expiring in 7 days. Roman would vacation, then return to Moscow's protection, probably forever. The problem was the law itself. The Maldives had no extradition treaty with the United States. Any formal request would require diplomatic channels, and diplomatic channels meant notification. The moment Russian intelligence learned their prince was being pursued in a foreign country, they would intervene. Roman would receive a warning, board an early flight, and disappear behind the Kremlin's wall. Standard procedure guaranteed failure. So the agents proposed something with no precedent in federal law enforcement. They would bypass treaties, courts, and paperwork entirely. They would fly to the Maldives as tourists, wait for Roman to check out of his resort, and grab him at the airport before he boarded his flight home. No warrants or extradition hearings, no advance notice to any foreign government. A reverse heist. Instead of stealing valuables from a secure location, they would steal the criminal himself from under his own country's protection. The plan violated every protocol in the federal manual. It could end careers, spark diplomatic warfare, and potentially land the agents themselves in a foreign prison. One official summed up the stakes in a sentence that silenced the conference call: "We cannot win this in a courtroom, so we have to win it on the ground." The mission shifted from investigation to extraction. The trap was designed. Now they had to build it without anyone noticing. How do you kidnap someone whose father can telephone the Kremlin without starting a war? And what legal fiction could possibly cover an operation this brazen? 2 days before Roman finished his vacation, a pair of Secret Service agents landed in Malé on a commercial flight from Singapore. They carried no credentials, no firearms, and no official documentation linking them to the US government. To immigration officers, they appeared to be sunburned tourists arriving for a diving trip, complete with snorkeling gear and hotel reservations. That night, they met the chief of the Maldives police service in a back room of a small station near the airport. Ceiling fans rotated slowly overhead as the Americans spread photographs across a wooden table. Screenshots of Roman's marketplace showing card numbers for sale. Spreadsheets documenting 2.9 million stolen accounts. Damage reports from American businesses bankrupted by fraud. The Maldivian officers had never encountered a criminal of this magnitude. Their typical cases involved petty theft and visa overstays. Roman represented a scale of criminality beyond anything their small island nation had ever processed. The agents made their pitch without euphemism. They needed Maldivian help, but not through extradition. Something else. The something else was a legal fiction elegant enough to survive scrutiny. Since formal extradition was impossible, the Maldives would use its immigration authority to expel Roman as an undesirable alien. No court hearing, no diplomatic notification, just a bureaucratic stamp declaring his visa invalid. Local officers would detain him at the airport for a fabricated immigration violation, then hand him directly to the Americans waiting at a private terminal. On paper, the Maldives would be deporting a misbehaving tourist. In reality, they would be delivering him to a US aircraft. The police chief understood the geometry of the risk. If Russia discovered the arrangement, they would accuse the Maldives of participating in state-sponsored abduction. The tiny island nation, population 400,000, could find itself crushed between two nuclear powers arguing over a hacker most Maldivians had never heard of. But the chief also saw something else in those photographs. A predator who had stolen from thousands of ordinary people across the world and faced no consequences because his father sat in parliament. He agreed, with one absolute condition. If the Russian embassy received any hint of warning, the operation died instantly. Total silence or nothing. The Americans arranged their escape vehicle, a Gulfstream G550 private jet, registered under a medical charter company, parked at Malay's executive terminal. The flight plan listed a patient transfer to a hospital in Asia. The actual cargo would be a handcuffed hacker bound for Guam, 8,000 miles east, the nearest scrap of US territory in the Pacific. Everything depended on speed and silence. Roman would check out of his resort, arrive at the airport, and present his passport at immigration. Officers would flag his documents, escort him to a holding room, and the Americans would take custody before anyone outside the terminal understood what happened. By the time Moscow received a frantic phone call, the Gulf Stream would be over the Indian Ocean, beyond any practical interception. If you are enjoying this story and want more deep dives into the world's most audacious cybercriminals, hit subscribe. It takes 2 seconds and helps these videos reach people who appreciate stories the mainstream media never covers. The trap was set. The jet was fueled. and then nature intervened with timing that felt almost personal. On the morning of July 5th, monsoon clouds swallowed the horizon. By afternoon, tropical storm winds bent palm trees horizontal and grounded commercial flights across the airport. The Gulfstream's pilots studied weather radar with growing alarm. The small jet weighed a fraction of a commercial airliner, more vulnerable to wind shear and turbulence. A takeoff in these conditions risked catastrophic failure over open ocean. Inside a cramped hotel room near the airport, the agents watched the same radar and calculated the same odds. If the storm delayed their departure by even a few hours, Roman would remain in Maldivian custody long enough for Russia to mobilize a response. One phone call from a diplomat, one official demand to release the prisoner, and the local authorities might lose their nerve entirely. The Maldivians had agreed to help, but they had not agreed to a confrontation with Moscow. Everything the agents had built over 3 days could collapse in a single afternoon. They faced a choice with no good options: wait for calmer skies and risk exposure, or launch into the storm and risk their lives. Roman's flight to Moscow departed that evening. They had to move regardless. But could they get airborne before the Kremlin discovered their operation? And what happens when you try to kidnap a Russian politician's son in the middle of a monsoon? The departure hall at Malay Airport smelled of rain and stale air conditioning. Roman Seleznev strolled toward immigration hand in hand with his girlfriend, wearing flip-flops and the relaxed expression of a man who believed he had outsmarted everyone who mattered. Behind the passport control desk, Maldivian police officers disguised as immigration clerks waited with a preloaded watch list flagging his name. Near the duty-free shop, 2 Americans in Hawaiian shirts pretended to examine souvenir magnets while tracking Roman's movement across the terminal with peripheral vision. Adrenaline flooded their bloodstreams. Years of investigation, thousands of hours of forensic work, had collapsed into this single moment at a counter in an airport most Americans could not locate on a map. Roman handed his Russian passport to the clerk with the casual confidence of a man who had never been denied anything. The officer scanned it. A red flag appeared on his screen, the result of instructions delivered the previous night. The clerk's expression shifted. "Please step aside, sir." 2 uniformed Maldivian policemen materialized from a side corridor and flanked Roman before he could process the request. "Routine security check. Please come with us." Roman's girlfriend tried to follow, her voice rising in confusion. An officer blocked her path. "Ma'am, wait here." Within 15 seconds, Roman was separated from his companion and escorted into a windowless room normally reserved for visa disputes and minor customs violations. The door closed behind him with a click that sounded like a lock engaging on the rest of his life. Roman's composure cracked almost immediately. He demanded explanations in English, then Russian, his voice rising with each repetition. The officers provided nothing substantive, citing only a vague irregularity with his travel documents. Outside the room, the American agents moved into position by the door, exchanging nods with the Maldivian team. Every second now carried weight. Roman glanced at his watch. His flight to Moscow departed in less than an hour. His irritation escalated towards something closer to fear. Then the door burst open and his fear became justified. The agents seized Roman by both arms before he could stand from his chair. "Roman Seleznev, you're coming with us. No Miranda warning, no diplomatic courtesy, and no explanation beyond 6 words." Roman's eyes went wide with recognition that something had gone catastrophically wrong. For a chaotic interval measured in heartbeats, the small room became a blur of limbs and overturned furniture. Roman was 30 years old and strong enough to fight back. Panic multiplied his strength beyond what the agents expected. A metal chair crashed against the wall. A table flipped sideways. Outside, his girlfriend heard the noise and began screaming for help. The Maldivian officers calmly blocked the door and waved away curious travelers. "Immigration matters. Nothing to see. Please continue to your gates." During the struggle, Roman clutched something more valuable than his own freedom: his MacBook Pro laptop, the machine containing his entire criminal infrastructure. Encrypted files, server credentials, even transaction records linking him to every card he had ever stolen and every buyer he had ever supplied. As the agents forced his hands behind his back, Roman thrust the laptop toward the open doorway, shouting to his girlfriend in Russian, "Take it." If she could secure the device, the Americans would have suspicion but no proof. An agent lunged and snatched the laptop in midair before it cleared the threshold. He passed it immediately to a Maldivian officer with a single instruction: keep the screen awake. Do not let it sleep. The device was still unlocked. Roman had been using it minutes earlier. If it entered sleep mode, encryption would engage and terabytes of evidence would become inaccessible behind a password only Roman knew. The agents had captured their primary target, but they had also captured something potentially more valuable: proof. What did that laptop contain that made Roman risk everything to keep it away from American hands? And would the evidence survive the 12-hour flight to U.S. territory? Roman emerged from the room in handcuffs, flanked by agents, cursing in Russian with fluency that required no translation. To passing travelers, the scene resembled a routine deportation of a disorderly tourist. The agents moved fast, half dragging their prisoner through a side exit where an unmarked SUV idled in sheets of monsoon rain. Water hammered the windshield as they shoved Roman into the back seat. The lead agent's phone buzzed. A voice on the other end delivered 5 words they had feared since the operation began. The Russians know. Roman's girlfriend had reached the Russian embassy. Phones were ringing between Moscow and Malé. The quiet phase of the operation was over. What remained was a race against diplomacy itself. The agent shouted to the driver. The SUV accelerated onto the tarmac road, wipers slashing uselessly at the downpour. In the back seat, Roman understood where they were heading: a private jet terminal, a one-way flight to American soil. The trap had closed, but the hardest part still waited on the runway, engines running in the middle of a tropical storm. Blue emergency lights swept across the rain-soaked tarmac as the convoy reached the Gulf Stream. Inside the cockpit, the pilot ran pre-flight checks with trembling hands. Wind gusts exceeded 50 miles per hour. The tower had not yet granted takeoff clearance. Worse, the control tower had just received urgent calls from Maldivian government officials, who had themselves received urgent calls from the Russian Foreign Ministry in Moscow. The phrase illegal rendition was now bouncing between foreign ministries on 3 continents. The tower controllers found themselves paralyzed between conflicting authorities, none of whom they wanted to anger. The Americans could not afford to wait for bureaucracy to resolve itself. The SUV skidded to a halt at the foot of the jet's air stairs. Agents and Maldivian officers formed a human corridor and hauled Roman into the rain. He planted his feet on the wet tarmac and refused to move, muscles locked against the hands pulling him forward. For a frozen moment, the scene resembled a VIP being protected by bodyguards, except this VIP wore handcuffs and shouted Russian profanity into the storm. Roman thrashed against his captors with renewed desperation. "This is a kidnapping," he screamed in English for the benefit of anyone listening. One agent, drenched and exhausted, leaned close to Roman's ear. "Yes, it is." They muscled him up the stairs and into the cabin. The Gulf Stream's interior was leather seats and polished wood paneling, a surreal backdrop for the violence unfolding inside. Agents strapped Roman into a seat using restraints designed for medical patients in transit, effectively binding him to the chair with no possibility of movement. He sputtered threats between ragged breaths. "Do you understand what you have done? This is an act of war. You will start World War III. My father will destroy your careers." The lead agent met his glare without expression. "Enjoy the flight," he says. Ground crew pulled the stairs away and sealed the cabin door. The pilot requested immediate clearance from the tower. The tower hesitated. An official voice crackled over the radio. A Maldivian government representative, under direct pressure from Russian diplomats, ordered the aircraft to remain grounded pending review. The pilot looked at the lead agent. The agent nodded once. The pilot ignored the instruction and pushed the throttles forward. The engines roared. The Gulf Stream rolled toward the runway as airport radios filled with competing commands. Rain sprayed from the wheels in continuous sheets. In the cabin, an agent gripped an armrest and calculated the odds of a successful takeoff in these conditions. Roman, breathing hard against his restraints, watched the terminal lights recede through the rain-streaked window and realized the plane was accelerating. He screamed toward the cockpit. "Stop! I am a Russian citizen. You have no authority." The jet aligned with the runway. Turbulence rocked the fuselage before they even reached rotation speed. For a sickening instant, the aircraft shuddered as wind caught the wings at an angle. One engine sputtered in the water-heavy air. Then, with a lurch that pressed everyone deep into their seats, the wheels left the ground. The Gulf Stream climbed into black clouds as lightning flickered across the horizon. Behind them, a belated command from the Maldives tower. "Gulfstream, return to the airport immediately. You are not cleared for departure." The radio went unanswered. By the time officials tried to reach the pilots via satellite phone, the jet was over the Indian Ocean, climbing toward 40,000 feet, beyond any practical jurisdiction. An agent allowed himself a single breath of relief. They had stolen a man from a foreign country during a monsoon, while diplomatic cables burned between Moscow and Malé. 12 hours of flight remained before Guam. Roman slumped in his seat, wet hair plastered to his face, and spoke quietly. The fight drained from his voice. "My father will not forget this. Russia will come for me." An agent shrugged. "They can try." The truth was, no one aboard knew what consequences awaited. Had they ignited a crisis that would escalate beyond anyone's control? Would a Russian military aircraft scramble to intercept them over international waters? Roman clung to that hope. The agents clung to the laptop sitting on the seat beside them, because what that device contained would determine whether this gamble paid off or destroyed careers. Somewhere over the Pacific, at 40,000 feet, two agents powered up Roman's MacBook Pro. The screen glowed to life, still unlocked, still logged into his accounts. What they found exceeded every expectation assembled during a decade of investigation. One window displayed an active login to Track2, his credit card marketplace, with a dashboard showing recent sales and pending transactions. Another tab showed an email draft containing thousands of card numbers formatted for immediate sale, complete with CVV codes and expiration dates. A folder labeled 2packCC_passwds.txt contained a cheat sheet linking Roman's aliases to servers across 3 continents. Because the agents had grabbed him mid-session, interrupting his work rather than allowing him to log out and encrypt, the laptop surrendered its secrets without resistance. Databases of stolen financial data stretching back years. Customer transaction logs identifying buyers. Communications with partners in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia. It was as if a bank robber's bag had split open mid-heist, spilling cash and handwritten notes, identifying every job. The agents preserved every byte with forensic precision. Roman could protest his innocence forever. The data made his guilt undeniable. 12 hours later, the Gulf Stream descended toward Andersen Air Force Base in Guam. Dawn light spread across the runway as the wheels touched concrete. The moment those tires made contact with American soil, the legal calculation changed completely. Roman Seleznev had entered United States territory, a jurisdiction where his father's political connections meant nothing, where Russian diplomatic pressure could not reach. U.S. Marshals and FBI agents waited on the tarmac to take formal custody of the prisoner. There was no press conference, no cameras, no public acknowledgement. Roman simply vanished into the American justice system, extracted from a tropical paradise and deposited into federal custody, as if plucked from thin air. Moscow erupted within hours. The Russian Foreign Ministry accused the United States and the Maldives of state-sponsored kidnapping in blatant violation of international law. They demanded Roman's immediate release and threatened unspecified consequences. The Maldivian government issued a cautious statement about expelling a foreign national for immigration violations, a bureaucratic fig leaf that convinced no one. Washington responded with diplomatic indifference. A State Department spokesperson noted dryly that the United States had acted within its authority to bring a criminal to justice. Depending on perspective, the operation was either a masterpiece of creative law enforcement or a dangerous precedent that could justify abducting anyone, anywhere, for any reason a powerful government deemed sufficient. Roman himself claimed he was a political prisoner, a pawn in American aggression against Russia. His protests changed nothing. Over the next 2 years, federal prosecutors in Seattle tried Roman Seleznev on 3 separate indictments. The evidence from his laptop, combined with years of accumulated investigation, constructed an airtight case no defense attorney could penetrate. Transaction records matched victim reports with mathematical precision. Server logs confirmed his aliases beyond reasonable doubt. Password files linked his identity to criminal infrastructure spanning a decade. In 2017, a federal judge sentenced Roman Seleznev to 27 years in prison, the longest sentence ever imposed on a hacker in American history. Prosecutors called it an unprecedented conviction. No cybercriminal of his magnitude had ever been captured, tried, and punished. Roman sits in a federal cell today, likely replaying the sequence of decisions that delivered him there. He chose the Maldives because it had no extradition treaty. He assumed legal immunity meant physical safety. He never imagined American agents would board a commercial flight, fly 8,000 miles, and grab him from an airport terminal during a monsoon while his girlfriend screamed in the next room. His empire of code and cryptocurrency could not protect him when a handful of determined investigators decided the rulebook no longer applied. A tropical vacation became his downfall. A loophole in immigration law proved more lethal than any malware he ever wrote. The Secret Service executed a reverse heist, and they stole the one thing Roman believed he had secured permanently: his freedom. But Roman's story raises a question American courts never answered. What stops this tactic from being used against anyone, anywhere, for any reason a government considers sufficient? The same creativity that captured a genuine criminal could, in different hands, snatch a journalist, a dissident, or an innocent person who angered the wrong official. Roman deserved prison. The method that put him there deserves scrutiny. If you want to see what happens when hackers target the wrong victim and trigger a response even more ruthless than Roman's capture, watch the story of the teenager who broke into the CIA director's personal email and discovered that some enemies never wait for courts, treaties, or mercy.